Hi everyone and welcome to our webinar. You're listening to IXIATalks episode 4, Reuse Metrics. My name is Sydney Jones and I'm the head of marketing communications here at IXIASOFT. I'll be your host. IXIATalks is a webinar series that covers DITA, agile document management, localization, IXIASOFT's very own CCMS, and more. Episodes are released periodically and cover a wide range of topics in the telecom industry. Before we get started, a few housekeeping details. This webinar is being recorded. We'll send you a link to the recorded version after it airs so you can share it with colleagues who weren't able to make it today. As audience members, you're muted, so don't worry, we can't hear you. And finally, if you would like to ask a question during the webinar, please type it into the questions section of your control panel in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, and we will answer these during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, our special guests today are Keith Schengili-Roberts from IXIASOFT and Sari Eklund from Ericsson. Hello, Keith and Sari.
Hello.
Hi, Sydney.
So before we dig in, let's start with a little background info on our speakers. I'm actually going to let you two introduce each other. So Keith, why don't you start?
Sure thing. Yes. I've been corresponding with Sari Eklund for I guess the past couple of years, talking about data metrics, and she is Ericsson's. She's been with Ericsson's customer products information organization for going on almost 20 years. She's been there since the beginning of Ericsson's journey into DITA, converting their original documents over to DITA, and has a lot of knowledge relating to the process of moving content smoothly and easily over to DITA, and is also interested in the topic of DITA metrics, and in particular as a key performance indicator. So that is and she is based out of Stockholm, Sweden.
Okay, thank you, Keith. I've been chatting with Keith for a couple of years, as he said, and Keith is the IXIASOFT Senior Data Content Strategist, and he's based out of Toronto. He's also a lecturer on information architecture at the University of Toronto. Keith is also the chair of the OASIS Data Adoption Committee and a member of the OASIS Data Technical Committee, as well as Lightweight Data Subcommittee.
Thank you, Keith and Sari. So on the agenda today, we have quite a few items. We'll start by data production metrics and why consistency matters. Then we'll move into IXIASOFT's built-in child intersection metrics gathering process, and then we'll get into the results showing you real numbers. Then we'll follow up with the rationale for Ericsson's approach to gathering consistent production metrics and how they created a key performance indicator from it. Then we'll get into how this is put into practice and discuss the results. And finally, as per usual, we'll be doing our questions period at the end. So, Sari, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about Ericsson and what the company does?
Yes. Ericsson was founded in 1876, and we have our global headquarters in Stockholm, Sweden. We have almost more than 100,000 employees worldwide, and more than 23,000 R&D employees. We work in the communications technology area, as you may know, and we have a lot of different product areas, like within the radio systems area, in IP network and transport, cloud systems, communication core, operations and support, and TV and media. Okay,
so Keith, can you tell our listeners what production metrics are and why you would want to measure them?
Sure thing. So, as you can see here, I've got 5 points outlined. The first one being, set more accurate project estimates, and this is good from a project management standpoint. The idea being that once you have an idea as to what it takes to create existing data-based documentation, you can then extrapolate from that and then have a better understanding as to where things will be going in the future for future document production. So again, great from a project management standpoint. It's also, in a similar way, it's a great way to justify the need for more resources. So if you know that it takes so much time to create this number of topics, created for a particular type of guide. And the nice thing about DITA in particular, I find, is that because everything sort of boils down to the topic, what I sometimes like to call it sort of like the atomic unit of information, is that you can always use it as a building block, and then you can basically say this particular document requires, say, ballpark it as, say, 1,000 topics. And from that, you can say that we know that it requires this amount of time from this number of people to get this sort of thing done for a particular deadline. If you're adding a new product line that requires its own set of install and upgrade and end user documentation, then it's a chance to understand, to better say that we will need to have an extra resource, and along with the supporting tools to be able to handle the additional load of documentation that needs to be done. So again, great for justifying the need for more resources if that's required. It also gives you a chance. Now the third one is a wee bit tricky. Understand the quality of production. So if you're doing any sort of quality measurements, and the one I like to bring up is the one that using the Fleisch-Kincaid reading test, which is essentially looking at the level of education for that a document is pitched at. And generally speaking, you want to pitch it so that at least in many cases, what the document will not be more than, say, a grade 7 or 8 standard of like a reading comprehension level. What you can then do is that you can then take all the information you get from applying that test across your DITA documentation, and then use that as essentially to say, it's like, wait a second, this particular document is being perhaps pitched a little bit too high for our audience. Maybe we should use this as a guide to our writers to say, okay, wait a second, can we make this easier to comprehend? So again, it's a way to get a better handle on the overall quality. And again, and allied to that is it's an opportunity to measure value. So if you have access to the web logs for your website, and you publish PDFs or web help or HTML files to the web based on your help, can you get a sense as to how and when people are accessing your docs? What is the most popular? What is the least popular? Do people come to your site before making a purchase of a product? Do they do it after? Is there significant aftermarket? These are all things which, again, gives you a chance to demonstrate that there is value for your documentation. And last but not least, and this should be fairly obvious at this point, DITA metrics can be used to guide managers, IAs, and writers on how to improve their content. And you're going to see some of that shortly. As you see, as the nature of DITA lends itself well to measurement and can provide guidance on how content can be improved. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you very briefly about one of the features that's already built into the IXIASOFT CCMS, and this is what's called the export children intersection function. And you can actually see this from you can actually see the menu being used in this particular case. This is, if you have a copy of the IXIASOFT CCMS, you already have this. And one possible way that you can do a way to measure reuse, and again, if you have our system, you can do this right now, is essentially compare 2 or more maps and see what they have in terms of child elements, such as the topics and images. Now, the IXIASOFT CCMS has a feature. Essentially, what you have to do is compare 2 maps, and then essentially you right-click on the map, and then select compare with, and then you export the children intersection. This then outputs a file that shows all matching and non-matching objects in those 2 particular maps. Next slide, please. So I'm not gonna read all of the material on this slide, but basically what happens is that you then get an exported file which you can bring into Excel or whatever other spreadsheet program you're using, and it contains things like the titles and all of the unique IDs for the topics, images, and conrefs from the original source map, as well as those that exist in the secondary map that are not contained from the original source map. And it identifies the type of object, so it'll say if it's concept, task, reference, troubleshooting, what have you, and also things like authoring, revision, like how many times this has actually been, like looking at the idea of churn, for example, within a particular topic. And this process, really, what it does is look at the topic object level reuse. Conrefs, by the way, are not included directly in this analysis, but having said that, our documentation group follows best practices and uses what are known as conref warehouses that share commonly used paragraphs and phrases. So any conref should be contained within the maps that are actually being examined. So in the next slide, so please go to the next slide. So this is actually a screen grab as to this is not the raw results. This is me going in and sort of adding some colors and then adding some math to how this is actually being worked out. And what I did is that I took the information on product content created between January 1st to December 31st for 2015 and for 2016. And then I put all that material in a single for a 2015 map and a 2016 map. And then I did a search on all content created and modified between the dates for those years, and then dropped them into two separate maps, and then did the child intersection export. So, and by the way, if you're wondering why I'm using data that's a couple of years old, in 2017, IXIASOFT underwent a major overhaul of its stocks, and from what I've seen from other firms that are using DITA, the following reuse rates are not atypical. So here's what you get. Here are the actual results. And initially, when you have a look at the very top bar here in this funnel graph, it's interesting. What you get is a list of provides a good visual representation of all the differences. So the initial thing is all shared objects between those 2 years, and in that case it's 70. It's just rounding it up 74%. Hey, that sounds really good. But the nice thing is that you can actually slice and dice things a bit further with this. And so delving further, I realized that if I look at the very bottom of this graph, that in fact 85% of what was actually being reused was images. And you have to think about, like, well, there's a lot of there are some technical images, there are screenshots that we have in our own documentation, but we do an awful lot of things like having company logos, and is that really content reuse? Is that useful to measure? So so what I'm trying to say here is that it's if you're doing an evaluation of reuse numbers, you want to make sure that you're measuring the right thing. So in this case, I really don't necessarily want to think about how images are impacting the overall reuse rates. So the question then becomes, and let's go to the next slide, please. Are images skewing the reuse rates from the IXIASOFT numbers? Short answer is yes, definitely. And while this is not necessarily a bad thing, you have to ask yourself, how important is it to know how many images are reused in your publications? Now, at this point, I am going to pass things over to Sari, and she's going to talk about Ericsson's own experience in this area and how they came to approach this particular problem.
Sari?
All right. Yes.
Okay.
I'm ready. Yes. We at Ericsson, we have many different customer product information groups, and they are very dependent on the organization and product areas in that way. In our organization, we deliver customer product information continuously in several tracks to a large number of software and hardware products. We have a legacy base of information content that needs to be updated but we also have a large number of new products requiring customer product information. Many of the organizations are already in DITA, and migrations are ongoing for other organizations. So most of the content is in DITA format, but we also have other formats like Excels and PDFs. And the other formats in that sense have no impact on the reuse rates for DITA that I will be showing later on. In the next slide here, I will talk a bit about DITA in numbers at Ericsson. For example, we have more than 1,000 registered users in DITA, and 200 of them are unique users per month. We have almost 600,000 DITA files, and if we look at the images, more than 100,000 images also, so quite a lot of content. In the next slide, I will talk a bit about the reuse in general that we have. We think that reuse is really structured and efficient and maintainable to work with, and we saw that we needed to choose a governance model for reuse, and that is dependent on different factors. We needed to set up rules to when and how the content can be reused. For example, if we are between different organizations, how we can reuse our content. We needed to identify content that required specific competencies. We also looked at the structure of the product information and to see what is possible to include in the reuse aspects and what is not possible to include. Another thing that we needed to understand was the geographical and organizational distribution of writers and contributors, and also their relative experience in DITA and in reuse in general. So in the next slide, I will show you a bit about the different reuse methods that we use. In our editing environment, the first aim, of course, is to write from the beginning with reuse in mind. That is the goal. And the different reuse methods that we use is reusing complete topics or bookmaps, maps even. We use referable content topics like in fragments of information. We also use variables as in keys, and also conditional processing with DITA files and bill manifest files. This is the content reuse, and then we have also reuse in our publication parts. Please go back to the previous slide. Thank you. Where we reuse complete libraries, and also if we look at the dynamic release management function in the CCMS, that structure really enables us to work with the reuse very efficiently. In the next slide, I will show you a bit about the reuse expectations that we had. Besides the expectations, of course, when we moved into DITA, we had also some of the reused aspects. And we saw already in the beginning that we have a large potential for reuse in the information content for our products. We knew also that continuous deliveries for many products requires efficient ways of working, and we saw that reuse could give us that in a way. And we saw also that we would get higher quality in the content by reusing in a proper way, and also that we would save actually both time and money. So the question was then, where do we stand today? So we started in the next slide to measure reuse in different ways, and to get a more complete view, both on the reuse we have in our content and also to see what potential reuse we have. So the potential reuse, it was measured in the output publication content, and it was predefined content publication for that. And it showed reuse in both topics and images, and it showed possible reuse within paragraphs or even with different IDs. So we could see that if we got unique matches or non-unique matches or even close matches in the content. Some conclusions in that method is that you, of course, measure and show reuse potential. That's good. You get suggestions on instances for reuse, but you need to package a specific amount of content, and usually you are dependent on external tools outside your company. So in that sense, you don't have it available in your editing environment. Sometimes we saw also that some of the reuse suggestions were a bit strange on illustrations or tables. And another good thing is that it also covered conditionalized content in the measurement. The other way that or method we used was to measure existing reuse, and that we did by comparing source content towards output, and got also matches in that possible way. And also that we started to measure reuse with the references-based reuse KPI in the CCMS system. In the next slide, I will talk a bit more about the reuse KPI and what that meant to us. This is available in the IXIASOFT CCMS directly to Ericsson users, and it measures on the content in the system, so you always have the latest content you're measuring on. And as we are a large organization, we can use the same method and have similar measurements that are comparable, so that was good. What it doesn't do is it doesn't consider conditionalized content, but all other reuse methods are considered. So basically you can generate the report directly in the CCMS tool, and also select the content you want to measure on is done in the CCMS tool. So this KPI, it measures reuse on all book maps, on all topics, images, and conrefs in that way. In the next slide, I will show a bit how it looks like in the tool, in the IXIASOFT CCMS tool. In this first example, it's an example from the DRM view, which is the dynamic release management view. And there you have a structure with different products and different libraries. And in this example, I selected one of them in the development phase, the library, and that contains all book maps, topics, and images for that product. And then you just right-click on the menu, and you can generate your reuse KPI report from there. So that's one way. And in the next slide, it's another way to do that. And in that example, it's basically that you can search for a specific amount of content, whatever you would like to define. And from the search result view in the lower part in the screen, you can then select which content you would like to measure the reuse on. So in this case, I selected 100 book maps from the search result view, and then generated the reuse KPI report from that in the menu. In both cases, the reuse KPI report is saved to your computer as a TSV file, and then it's possible to open it in Excel easily. If we look in the next slide a bit about how the output or the reuse report looks like, as I said, it can be created for different selection of content, and the measurement is done as a relationship between unique ID references in the selected content. So basically you get, as shown here, a reuse percentage overall, which means that it's for all objects referenced by the selected book maps. And the same goes for the reuse percentage on topics, images, and conrefs. That is measured the same way. In the next slide, then we come into our measurement, a bit on the results. And we started actually already measuring reuse 2016. And that was more like a starting point for us to know where we stand with the reuse. And by that, we didn't work with reuse that much in the beginning, but we made some adjustments in the information before migrating to DITA by that time frame. But today, when we use the reuse KPI report, we actually have a measurement every quarter on our products in the CCMS. And if we go into 2017, in the diagram, we can see that it started to increase the reuse, and we did some things there. We started to work more focused with reuse aspects in the information. For example, that meant that we created a reuse strategy, and we started to inform and work together more closely together with our tech providers on reuse aspects. And we had some even workshops on reuse with our tech providers. We did different things, and I think that paid us a good result also in the measurement here, as seen. And if we look at 2018, we continue to work with the reuse, and I think that it starts to increase still, and we see an increase also further on. But it feels like that we have started to get to be more mature in our tech provider way of working with reuse, and it's a more natural way of writing documentation today to think about the reuse in the first place when you write your content.
Thank you, Sari. So before we get into the question period, let's go over some of the key takeaway points, and I'll let Keith and Sari kind of bounce off each other here for this slide.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start, and yeah, I mean the results are for both firms I think are very interesting, but I want to again emphasize the point that you want to know what you're measuring and why. One of the things I certainly have seen from some firms that have decided to examine reuse rates and it is that it does or can lend itself to a way so that it can be the system can be gamed by the writers if people are not careful. So if for example if you are in fact emphasizing reuse above all else, and for example images are part of that, then the writers may potentially throw in more images than is absolutely necessary to make sure that in fact the reuse rates are artificially high. So you have to be careful that you know what you're measuring, so that you don't have unintended consequences at the end of things.
Exactly, and also that when you start measuring reuse, you need to be very careful and realize that it may take a couple of years even before you have a reliable information. So it's more to follow a trend, how that measurement works.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where it will take some time to get a sense as to where the reuse rates are and potentially to make adjustments and changes on the way. So when you're measuring reuse in the short term, it can be helpful in determining the usefulness of any training that you may have had at the start of the process, and also give people like information architects an idea as to what they need to tweak and what to tell the writers going forward.
Yeah. And measuring and looking at the reuse results, you need to always be careful when you analyze the results and really understand what kind of content has been selected for the measurement and what kind of impacts the measurement has, and before you start changing things in your content. So analyze carefully.
And again, and then the final point: find a balance between how to reuse how to find reuse for your existing content and maintainability. Again, I have seen some places that arguably go overboard with having things like conrefable topics for things like the end stage of a process where it says and click OK. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but if the time needed to go for a writer to go and find the conref and include the phrase again and again and again, it might actually be taking more time than is strictly necessary for the writer to simply type in the line and click OK or something along those lines. So and the same goes for whatever content strategy you come up with relating to content reuse. So you have to find a balance between, you could, in the absolute extreme case, come up with conrefs for absolutely every single letter in the alphabet. That of course would be ridiculous. So you want to make sure that you as I say here, you find a balance between what is expedient and also what can be maintained easily and where it just makes sense. to do reuse within the body of content. I know, for example, within IXIASOFT, if there's ever a bulk of a topic, especially if it's like stepwise information that is technical and is copied, it typically appears in more than one topic, we insist on there being a conrefable single topic, rather than say conrefing from one topic to another topic, which leads to spaghetti topics, which you don't want. So again, comes all the way back to content strategy and making sure that you inform the writers as to what is considered best practices within your own writing organization to have, make things that are consistent and not hampering the writers in their ability to write.
Thank you, Keith. Sorry. Sorry, Sari. Did you have another thing to add on?
No. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you both. We'll now be wrapping up as usual with a few questions. So a quick reminder here that you can type your question into the questions section of your control panel in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. So I'll get into the questions here, and I have noticed that there are quite a few comments about the sound quality on Sari's side. So I'm sorry if you had a hard time hearing. I think there may have been an internet issue. It was a little bit choppy. So sorry if you're answering any of the questions, just make sure you're speaking directly into the mic, and hopefully that will alleviate the choppiness.
Yes, okay.
So we'll go ahead with the first question here. So Sari, do you have any plans to develop an over reuse metric or KPI? Are you at that stage yet?
No, we are not in that stage yet. It's more that we have started to use the reuse KPI and look at the products that we work on, but maybe if we get further on with the measurements over the years, that we can look at that kind of overall KPI also.
Okay, next question. How do you measure or audit the quality of the reuse? For example, if someone is going overboard with reuse, for example, they conref everything even when not necessary, do you audit the reuse regularly?
We don't do it regularly, but we do some testing and look at the content from now and then. And if since we have a close cooperation with our tech writers, I think that we have a quite good control of that. So we are really emphasizing that not to create reuse in too difficult way, to try to keep it simple and really reuse when needed also.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that just briefly, just the fact that quite often I guess one of the symptoms of over reuse is that other writers will often highlight what's going on. And the thing is that you can potentially track it back to like who did what, but usually it's more the instance of why did somebody conref this particular phrase, or when in fact it's it's a standard part of the standard phrasing for things derived from, say, the style guide. So in cases where things go overboard, these things are then sort of highlighted between the writing staff and the IA at IXIASOFT. And and then a greater awareness evolves over time as to how things are can or have been overdone in the past, and how to improve things in the future. Kind of a nice example of that I came across recently had to do with key use and naming conventions for keys. Because recently anybody who knows our product know that we've shifted over from calling the product from the IXIASOFT DITA CMS to the IXIASOFT CCMS, and that caused a kind of an issue in the keys to make sure that we wanted to make sure that we didn't, because the key was originally called DITA CMS, but of course that is no longer what it should be called. So we're considering just calling it product or product one to make it as generic as possible, so that we can carry with the keys going forward. That's less of a reuse case, but gives you a sense as to the how you can things need to be tweaked over time with regard to reuse policies.
Okay, so our next question here is, how do you measure the time savings from reuse?
We don't measure the time savings in that sense, but we see that and the experience from our tech writers is that it is much quicker to update for new products if we have a good reuse in place, and we can have identified the different products, or even between products, different topics or book maps that can be reused. So they save time in their daily work.
Okay, and our next question, do we have any estimates of what is a good industry standard for reuse percentage?
That's a trickier one. What I have, and then now the thing is, I can't give you numbers specifically. What you've seen in the IXIASOFT and Ericsson sense, like, you know, here are actual numbers that you can go in and play with. But it's worth keeping in mind that in the IXIASOFT case, we are a software firm. In the Ericsson case, they are starting their reuse policies, and it is in some cases a mix of software as well as hardware. So ideally, you would want to, when you're doing measuring, you want to keep an eye, you would want to look at the reuse rates for software versus hardware. And I also noticed that reuse rates tend to differ in terms of industry type. Now, again, I can't give you figures because I can't think of them off the top of my head, but I have seen different reuse rates that seem to be specific to things like semiconductor industry, to the medical device industry, to, you know, they do seem to vary, but on the whole, you know, if I had to sort of pick a single number, I would say that you would probably want to aim for at least half of all content to be reused, and in some cases that simply is not possible. If each product is going to be, you know, pretty much unique from release to release, that it's harder to get reuse rates even that high. But often you'll find that there are a lot of, say, conceptual bits of information that can be reused again and again. So to sort of summarize, what I have found in my experience is that it does tend to differ depending on whether we're talking software or hardware or, say, processes, and also in terms of industry type. So take the information that you see from this presentation, see whether or not it applies to your own situation, and then, you know, use this as you can as a ballpark. And the nice thing is that, you know, there are some other sources of information out there relating to metrics. So seek those out, and hopefully that'll help.
Okay, so we've actually got quite a few more questions here, so let's maybe just try and keep the answers to a minimum, just so that we can get through everyone. So our next question is this KPI report feature on the context menu a customization that was done specifically for Ericsson? Or is it a feature of the DRM product? We don't have it in our environment.
Yes, let me answer that one. So this was done as a development job specifically for Ericsson, and I did actually check with one of our senior developers on this point, because I knew this question was going to come up. So while this was done specifically for Ericsson, and it's not an in and out, it's not available as an out-of-the-box thing for IXIASOFT customers. This same thing can be applied to other IXIASOFT customers if there is interest. The thing to do at that point is to contact IXIASOFT's customer care, and to bring along what your own expectations are regarding reuse, and what you would consider as being a helpful KPI, because your situation may not be the exact same as Ericsson's. In fact, I'd say it would be impossible for that to be the case. So having said that, come to IXIASOFT if you are interested in what you've seen with Ericsson, and we can help customize a solution to fit your needs.
Thank you, Keith. Our next question, are you using an authoring assistance tool? With such tool, you can reuse previously created and approved sentences for new texts. The terminology component helps you to use specialized terms correctly.
No, we are not using that kind of tool. We are using the IXIASOFT CCMS and the Oxygen editor within that. So we are not using that kind of tool at our company.
And again, just to answer on the IXIASOFT side, no, we're not using any tools in that area either. We are certainly we've been contemplating using acrolinks, which is probably one of the tools that you're thinking of. Some other things that we're also considering. I mean, we have a style guide that we use internally, and we try to emphasize that does help, of course. The other thing is we're also have some schematron rules that we're implementing to, you know, again, which are aids to the writers if they, for example, type a word the, you know, quote unquote wrong way, so to speak. There's a pop up and say, here's how this ought to be done. Again, less in terms of reuse, but it does contribute to helping in that area.
Yeah. I can add just that, of course, we have acrolinks in our company also, so we have that in that way.
Okay, one of our last questions here. Again, if you have a question, we've only got a couple left, so I encourage you to write it into the control panel. Does your measure include the reuse across deliverable methods such as print, online, help desk, chatbot, etc.?
I would say that it does, because those are examples of different publication channels, I would say. So what we are measuring is in the editing environment. So we are measuring in the source content. So in that way, yes, it does.
And
To consider what method is the best to use, if you should reuse the complete topic, or if you can use a variable as a key in some cases, or even a fragment.
Okay, and the next question, do your reuse metrics, this is the last question, do your reuse metrics include branch filtering reuse of topics?
Branch filtering, it doesn't actually, the reuse KPI doesn't consider conditionalized content, if that's what you mean, but otherwise it contains everything that we have. It depends on what kind of content we have selected for the measurement, I would say. So that is the key, what it contains.
Okay, so I think that's it for our questions. Thanks everyone who asked a question, and thank you Keith and Sari, both for answering the questions and for joining us and for sharing your expertise today. Our next webinar is scheduled for April 11th, 2019, and will feature documentation specialist Marie-Louise Flack and Noam Cruzrejo from IXIASOFT. So follow us on Twitter, check out our website, and stay in touch for updates. If you would like to be featured in one of our webinars, or you have a unique topic idea, please get in touch at team.ccms@ixiasoft.com. We'll see you next month.